Happy Monday, everyone. It's John Lorden here with another episode of Brain Scratch Case Cracked. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've got a really interesting case to go over with you guys. This one, it kind of blows my mind. There's a really bizarre twist in it. I don't know how this happened. It's kind of a commentary maybe on our current status when it comes to newspapers and media and things of that nature. But before we get into that, this is the first case cracked we've had in 2 weeks because last week we did the Lorden Arts Q&A live. I want to thank everyone that showed up for that. I really appreciate seeing so much support on that. I also want to give a big shout out and thank you to everyone that used the super chat feature. I didn't know that that was even going to be active on my Q&A. I didn't have to turn it on or anything, so it was a real surprise to me, and I really appreciate you guys donating and keeping me here doing what I love doing, so thank you so much for being a part of that. All right, we will do comment reviews, but we'll do it about the last episode of Case Cracked, which was 2 weeks ago. I'll give you guys a reminder about what that case was when we get to that section of the show, but let's get started. This one I like to call the body double. The shower scene from Psycho featuring Janet Leigh is considered one of the greatest scenes ever produced in Hollywood. Maybe Alfred Hitchcock's best. But did you know that there's a real murder connected to Psycho? And a mystery that Alfred Hitchcock himself might not have even been able to dream up? When watching the shower scene, it's easy to assume that there is only one actress, Janet Leigh, being featured in the shower. However, there's some movie-making magic going on there. A body double, Marlee Renfro, is featured in the close-ups of the body shots, including the infamous knife swing in front of the belly button. Marlee was born in Dallas. Performing nude wasn't something that some women would do, especially at that time, but Marlee had no issue showing off her body. She embraced it. She had worked as a Vegas showgirl and appeared in many men's magazines with names like Escapade, Follies, Adam, and even this very straightforward Man. And she was featured on the cover of the 1960 September issue of Playboy. And she also worked at events as an official Playboy bunny. Of course, she was also the body double for one of the most famous scenes in film history, which she got paid only $500 to do. CBS News, the Associated Press, and others would report about the July 1988 sexual assault and murder of the body double from that famous scene in Psycho, who was now 71 years old, but they were referring to a woman named Myra Davis, a widow living in West Los Angeles. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death with her own underwear. In 2002, a book called Body Double tried to clarify the name difference, stating that Myra Davis was her real name and Marlee Renfro was her stage name. A tip came in from Myra's granddaughter, asking authorities to look into the guy living next door. Unfortunately, nothing clicked for investigators, who chose to focus more on Myra's grandson as a potential suspect, who was struggling with drug addiction. When he passed a polygraph test, the case went cold. It was another death that would change the direction of the investigation 10 years later. In 1998, Jean Orloff was a 60-year-old woman who loved the Chicago Cubs. A smoker who was already being treated for an irregular heartbeat. When she was found dead and naked in her apartment, the coroner's investigator concluded she had died of a heart attack. Jean's body was sent to a mortuary. Her family was preparing for her cremation. Before that could happen, a county records employee noticed that the death certificate was not signed. They sent a different coroner's investigator, a man named Sherwood Dixon, to the mortuary to complete the death certificate, and upon seeing Jean's body, he noticed marks and bruising on her neck. The original assessment that she died of a heart attack was obviously wrong. She, too, had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. Los Angeles investigators now had 2 unsolved murders, and thankfully another tip would come in. A man named Joel Stein came forward. He was the brother-in-law of a man named Kenneth Dean Hunt, a local handyman, and Joel told Hunt's parole officer that he suspected Hunt of the killings. Investigators followed up and acquired a sample of Hunt's DNA, which linked him to the DNA found at the crime scenes. Hunt was previously the next-door neighbor of Myra Davis. At that time, he was only 22 years old. And a decade later, he was doing handyman work for Jean Orloff. Hunt has a history of sex crimes and aggressive outbursts. In between the two murders, he punched a 67-year-old neighbor so hard, the man died from hitting his head on the sidewalk. Hunt was convicted of manslaughter and served a few years. Both Myra and Jean's homes had also been burglarized. How did they ever suspect Jean's death was natural? Of course, Jean's family was very frustrated. Her sister stated, "I find it appalling that so many mistakes can be made and no one has ever had to explain themselves. It is merely a stroke of luck that Kenneth Hunt is not still walking the streets today." Kenneth Dean Hunt was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder in 2001. 2 juries deadlocked for the death penalty. He wound up with a life sentence with no possibility of parole. In 2010, another author would come along to clear up one big mistake in this whole story. Robert Graysmith was a lifelong fan of Marley Renfro, and after noticing a comment in a news article from the granddaughter of Myra Davis stating that Myra would have never worked nude, he decided to dig in further. Robert found out that they are not the same person. Marley Renfro was the body double in the shower scene, but Myra Davis was Janet Leigh's stand-in. A stand-in is a person that's hired to literally stand in position while lighting, cameras, and other shot elements are set up. Quote, "I discovered Marley was still alive. It turns out she's been so busy fishing in Utah, hiking in Alaska, swimming with dolphins in Florida, and generally living life to the full that she had no idea she was meant to be dead," said Robert Graysmith. His book, The Girl in Alfred Hitchcock's Shower, asserts that Hunt was actually obsessed with the film Psycho and actually intended to kill Marley Renfro, the actual body double, but got it wrong, as so many other people did. Marley is married, now going by Marley Renfro Peterson. She lives in the Mojave Desert and occasionally shows up at conventions to meet fans and do signings. Myra's IMDb page, under her true stage name, which is Myra Jones, shows that she did stand-in work for 3 films, had a few small roles in others. Media reports say she did several commercials in her later years, usually being cast as the quintessential grandmother in ads for Country Time lemonade and Grandma's Homestyle cookies. She met and fell in love with her late husband at MGM Studios. In the trivia section of her IMDb profile, it now specifically states she was the stand-in, not the body double in the shower scene, for Janet Leigh in the movie Psycho. Case cracked. I can't believe that it would have gone that long and someone wouldn't have done the footwork to look into the fact, are we talking about the same person here? Are we talking about the right person? And that wasn't the only thing they got wrong. They also credited Myra with doing the voice of Mother, which she didn't. So just a lot of kind of weird facts that are being thrown around in this instance, and just people not getting it right. And I think it's just one of those cases of, as soon as it was published in a book, people are looking to that book as a source and then just quoting that information and going forward from there. Still very tragic. I'm really curious why, we had that tip kind of given to the investigators, and that they didn't look into the neighbors deeply enough to see that there was someone living there that had a history. This guy, he has previous assaults. He has numerous outbursts. There was a lot of information that came out during trial about his backstory, and it just seems like investigators just missed him somehow. Now, from what I understand, that house next to Myra's, there was many people living in there. I don't know if there was some illegal activity going on or if it was just a bunch of people that were down on their luck or a bunch of actors deciding to live together. But from what I saw, there was at one point up to 8 different people living there. So it could be that the investigators looked into it and just hit the wrong people. Maybe they didn't even know that Hunt was living there at the actual time. Interestingly, the person that turned Hunt into his parole officer, he was living in that same house at that time as well. And he did talk about the fact that he noticed a trend of Hunt basically binge using cocaine around both of those deaths. And that's part of what he told the parole officer that made him so suspicious that Hunt might be involved with that. So I guess it's just a good thing that Hunt's sitting in jail and there is no chance for him to get out. But it's still certainly tragic. We're talking about two ladies that had to lose their life for that. And that's the other baffling thing. And I kind of mentioned it, but I don't know how they could have looked at the crime scene of the second death and saw that there was a robbery that took place there of when Jean was killed and not put together, okay, this is not a natural death. I mean, did they run the assumption that Jean had a heart attack and then someone broke in and kind of, went through her place? In her case, part of her bed was actually caught on fire. And it seems like the excuse they bought for that was that, well, she was a smoker and it was probably her cigarette and her cigarette caught it on fire. But they didn't find an actual cigarette to coincide with that. So I don't know. A lot of weird things around this case. But, and I totally understand Jean's sister's comment. She feels like it's almost like luck that they put all this together. I think the real hero in this whole story for me is that county records processor, the one that noticed that the death certificate was not signed. That really seemed to turn it around. And there's almost another stroke of luck that happens in that, because originally they contact Jean's doctor to come out and to certify she's dead and to sign the certificate. But there's some reason why he can't show up. I can't remember what the reason is. So because of that, the coroner sends out this other investigator to do it instead. I think it's a better situation that it was a coroner's investigator that made that determination. I'm sure her doctor would have found the same thing. And, when it comes to bruising like that, the longer that a body has been sitting, the more that bruising shows up. So I'm fairly confident anyone else that was looking would have caught on to that. However, having it be the actual coroner's investigator to make that determination, I think is a way easier way to push around their initial, or to reverse their initial evaluation. I think if it was a doctor, they might have had a little bit of an uphill battle. Could it have still worked out and been done? I think so, but I just think the chances of it were much better because it was a coroner's investigator. Before we move on to the comments from the last episode of Case Cracked, I want to thank new patron Ruth Garcia. Thank you so much, Ruth, as well as Patricia Woolard, who is an existing patron but decided to increase her pledge. Thank you so much, Patricia. I really, really appreciate that. So last episode, 2 weeks ago, was Waiting for Emily Paul, and that was a story of a 14-year-old that ran away. And then about 5 years later, just within the past few months, her mother gets confirmation that she is indeed alive, but she wants to keep her location private. And there's no answer of if she's going to go visit her mother or not. A lot of questions around that case. I wanted to present that case as an example of there is a right way, and I kind of said this in the video too, there's a right way to disappear, but to still make sure that your family isn't constantly worried, and especially to make sure that law enforcement isn't using resources on that case if they could use those resources in some other place better. So I really appreciate that Emily at least got the word back to her family and that they were able to close that case out. You guys had a lot of very interesting opinions. It seems to have hit a personal nerve for a lot of you. It does for me as well, especially in terms of the family dynamics and what potentially could have caused Emily to leave in the first place. So let's take a look at a comment here from Logan Hensley. Well, you can't pick your family. And honestly, I haven't been in any contact with my family for 5 years, and some recently started looking for me as a missing person. But I quickly reached out to someone to let them know I am okay, and as perfect as they think they are very, very bad and negative for my well-being mentally. There are 3 sides to every story, and we are only going to get one side. So as perfect as her family may think they are, maybe they aren't good for her and she's actually in a better place. Sometimes we jump to conclusions that she was taken or with someone bad, when sometimes it's the exact opposite. Thanks again and again and again, Lord and Arts. Thank you, Logan, and thank you for giving us some other considerations on that. And I can definitely speak to that. When I was young, there was a family that kind of took me in. Not that I necessarily needed to be taken in. It was just more of a matter of logistics. I had just graduated. I didn't really have a car. I wanted to start my new big job at a Blockbuster Video, for those of you that remember what that is. And there was a family there was a friend of mine, and her family basically allowed me to live with them, which was much closer. It would have been practically impossible for me to take that job from where I was living. And essentially, I wound up moving out of my home at the age of 17, and I never went back. So I understand that a little bit as well. And you really make a good point here about your well-being mentally. And sometimes that's not always something as big or obvious as, someone is being straight up abused, they're being beaten. Sometimes it's really hard. It's more at an emotional level. So in some cases, you might tell someone about it and they might not even really understand what you're talking about, but within the core of who you are, that being around those people is harmful to you. So I definitely can appreciate that aspect as well. Susan Hugin replied to Logan, "Yes, I can relate to what you're saying, but at 14 years old, you do not know the real dangers out there. And from what I know about her family, nothing was as bad that couldn't have been resolved without running away into the arms of some serious danger. She should have at least called someone when she turned 18 years old. It's just my opinion, of course." Yeah, Susan, and I see your points in that as well, particularly at the age of 14. Does she really have a great grasp on the realities of living on her own? Probably not. I do think that there's something to be said for how we individually mature. Some of us at that age could be a lot more mature than others of us, and we really don't have enough insight into Emily to know one way or the other in this particular situation. It would terrify me if I had a 14-year-old that ran away. I'm sure I would do everything possible to try to get them back. But I also remember being young and being in some really tough situations and feeling like wanting to run away. I actually did run away in one case, but I was really, really young, and literally all I knew to do was walk around the block. And I think I got around the block twice before someone found me. But in that sense, in terms of seriously running away, literally for years, I didn't have any personal experience with that. But I do recall just feeling like sometimes you were in a situation and there was nothing you could do to change it. Sometimes the levels that are built in family in terms of who's in charge of who and who's supposed to listen to who, when you're a kid, you don't see outside of those constructs. You don't know that you could go tell your dad, "Hey, I don't agree with what you're doing," and, start a conversation down that line. In some families, that's just unheard of. In some families, your dad would turn around and pop you. So it's very difficult to know what's going on with this particular case from that aspect of it. I do suspect that there's probably some element within her family life that she was not happy with that at least nudged her in the direction of moving out and being on her own. And possibly if someone else helped facilitate that, that might have kind of greased the wheels to make it happen. So it could actually be a little bit of a mix of both types of things going on here. Nicole Alderfer. In college, I had a friend, when he was 15, ran away from Georgia and lived with a family in Chicago during high school. Mom was married 8 times by the time he ran away. He joined the armed forces, went to college, and graduated 1 year ahead of me, so it can be done. He said after he ran away, he never contacted his family again. Also, he said he did not believe they ever went looking for him. That's really, really sad. It's weird because there's kind of a good aspect to that comment in terms of he was able to be independent. He was able to make things happen for himself and put himself on a track to do good things. But then in the other side of that, the feeling that he has that they never went looking for him just tells me that, he's really, really hurt by that. It's sad because he might be incorrect. I mean, how would he know if he's not been in contact with them if they actually tried looking for him? I guess nowadays you could do some things, do searches on Facebook or see if there's even a missing persons report that's open for you. Maybe he did something along those lines. But yeah, kind of a mixed message on that one. It's good and bad in that situation. Jenna Ferguson, I used to live in that area. There are rumors that there was lots of abuse in the home. And this started a pretty good conversation down below where many of you were pointing out, rumors are rumors. We can't really act on those. And I agree, but then there was others that were talking about kind of the same points that we're talking about here. Who knows how these things could have impacted the situation? Who knows how she could have felt about some of the things that were happening at the home? Some of you seem kind of skeptical about the mother. Those of you that have seen interview footage of her, I didn't get any particular strange feeling. I did see a couple of interviews with her, but it seems very clear to me that something obviously was going on in this home. That, if Emily felt like she was in an environment that was nurturing and safe and where she felt like she had reasonable freedoms and all that kind of stuff, why would she run away? So something, at least looking out in on this, from my perspective, something was up. I don't know what it was. Ray in Prague. If you are abused, you know that authorities nod and make promises and then return you to your abuser. Ghosting everyone is the only option. Sounds like she took control of her own life. The details are none of our business if she is okay now. A couple things I don't know that I necessarily agree with, but it's a good talking point, and that's why I wanted to include this, Ray. I know that feeling that it might seem like it's the only option. I've absolutely been there. But what I've learned much later in life is whenever I have any type of issue that I'm trying to face now, it's really a matter of building the team to try to take that issue on. And when you're that young and you're just looking at your family structure, it might not be a team that you can build within your family structure. If your dad is abusing you in some way, you might not be able to get your mom on your side with that because she might be blind to the situation intentionally because that's her way of surviving in the situation. So I get that feeling that sometimes the only choice you have is to leave. But I would stress to anyone that is potentially in a situation like this, look to build up a team of supporters in your life to try to handle those situations. Might be people that you know from school, might be people that you know from work or that you know personally. Look for every other option possible before doing something like this, because as we've talked about several times with this case, you set a family into frenzy, which, maybe you feel like that part's justified, but with what they do, all of a sudden other resources are going to be used in the search for you. And those resources are pretty valuable and sometimes very thin in certain areas, particularly when we're talking about law enforcement. So really, really think twice about it. And if nothing else, if you learn nothing else from this episode, just look at this situation of get the message back. Just get the message back to your family so at least the case can get closed and law enforcement can move on. And, if you don't want to go see your family, you don't have to. Cassandra Lauberecht. Also just want to bring up that many people are assuming that she was lured away by a much older predator. However, there are underground groups that will help abused women, children escape from their abusers. It works like an underground railroad system. It's completely confidential and secretive. I'd be a little leery about some type of system like that. It was kind of different. The only situation I can apply it to is what I went through. And this was a family I was familiar with. I had known for years at that point. I just get worried when I hear about systems like this because there are systems like this also that are running trafficking. So you really want to be careful about who you're turning to. And obviously, these systems aren't necessarily going to be on the up and up, particularly if it's just a child trying to escape. For women, yes, you can certainly find legitimate organizations that help women escape from situations. But once you're talking about children that aren't 18 yet, legally, it's a mess, and you could wind up being an accessory in some way. So I would really, really watch out for using that type of organization if I was in a situation like that. I just point back to your team. You need to get a team together that's willing to support you. And even in several of these examples we've seen, a family took someone in, a guy was able to go and move in with a different family and get into college. There are good people out there. You really have to try to find them and kind of pull that energy into your life and make sure that you nurture those types of relationships. Debbie Argust. Hi, John. I've been binge watching your videos, and last night I decided to write you about my missing son. He disappeared 2 years ago. He had just turned 21, and the police said there was nothing we could do. His cell phone was turned off and all his clothes are still in his room. Well, I thought I'd write to you today, but he called me today. I'm just so grateful he's alive. I hung up the phone and said, I guess I won't be writing to John Lorden today. Yay. My family has heard the news and we are all so happy. Tomorrow I'll tell other relatives and friends, but for now, I'm just so overwhelmed. I feel bad for all these parents. I know the pain of not knowing. Thank you for all you do. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. It really brought a light to my day, and I hope it does the same for everyone out there that got to hear that as well. And I hope everything goes well in terms of you guys getting reconnected and maybe building some new bridges and building that relationship back up. Take care, everyone. I'll see you back here on Wednesday with a brand new Brain Scratch Searchlight.